Welcome back, Jennifer.
Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Jennifer Fidel, Director of Public Programming for the Assisi Institute, International Center for the Study of Archetypal Patterns. Today is the second of our complimentary four-part series by Dr. Michael Conforti entitled Ravages of Oppression, Denial, and the Life of the Forgotten, which will continue on the following two Saturdays, April the 3rd and April the 10th. The Assisi Institute provides several certificate programs and many public series throughout the year. I would like to mention our next series, Science and Psyche, The Confluence of Matter and Spirit, will begin this Wednesday, March 31st, with Efrat Janot. This is a four-part series which explores neuroscience, quantum physics, biology, and their relationship to the psyche and depth psychology. If you have not received the mailer on this series, you may find more information on the Assisi website, where you can sign up to receive information on all of our certificate and public programs. Before we get started today, there are a few housekeeping notes. For the duration of this program, you will be muted. We will not be taking questions today, but if you have any comments or reactions you'd like to share with Dr. Conforti, he can receive your comments by emailing Annette at the Assisi office. And also a reminder that we are recording, so each of you will receive a copy of today's presentation. Please look for this around April the 1st. So now I would like to turn this over to my dear friend and colleague and fellow member on the Assisi Board of Directors, Dr. Sylvia Barron, who is the Director of International Studies. And she's going to introduce our international participants today. Thank you.
Пожалуйста. Мой дорогі колеги, добрий вечер y добро пожаловать. A nuestros colegas españoles que hablan español y portugués, benvinha especialmente a Denise Ramos, who's a leading Jungian analyst in Brazil, a tutti quanti colleghi carissimi in Italia che ci staranno, and bienvenue to les Français, herzlichen willkommen to our German speakers. Truly, we are an international community. I welcome you as Director of International Studies and also as board member of the Assisi Foundation. It is the Assisi Foundation which is funding Dr. Conforti's lecture. And I'd like to say a big thank you to the team behind the scenes that sends you a beautifully recorded a beautiful recording of the session in all three languages, to Hank Smith, most magnificent master who is in South Africa, Alexander Romanov in Russia, spasiba, Alice Milani in Italia, grazie, y Raquel Cavallasi in Mexico, muchísimas gracias. It truly is a partnership among people all around the world to make this happen. And this is a lecture by Dr. Conforti, as I said, funded by the Institute. And you will be receiving an email from us introducing our work and how you can support our ongoing programming. But as we were talking about setting up the Ravages and the dates, Michael, I don't think that we realized the importance of maybe how unconsciously these dates were chosen. Because many of you know that today is the first day of Passover. And the first day of Passover commemorates not only the story of liberation, but also the story of oppression. And what tonight starts for the Jewish community is the importance of knowing that we must remember, that memory must be kept alive, that the forgotten must not stay forgotten. And as we move into next week with the celebration of Easter for our Christian and not necessarily Christian, for those who honor what it means to suffer and to come back to life, perhaps. I think these themes are really alive in what these sessions are about. And that is the importance of not forgetting and of telling the story. So I hope this captures and frames what we are about to hear today from Dr. Conforti. Thank you.
Thank all of you, Jennifer and Sylvia, putting this together, and all of our colleagues from around the world. It's just a great feeling. And as a preamble, I want to say, look, I know this material is difficult, and I did not present this earlier in the year because I think things were too dark. I think we have a sense we're just beginning to come out of a very dark period. I know in Latin America, colleagues in Ecuador and other places, it's hard to get the vaccine, but many parts of the world, we're beginning to see a little bit of light coming in. I hope Denise and you and your colleagues in Brazil and Fleming, I know you're living in America, but your people in Europe, that they're seeing a change. So. And I also want to say those that are new, we have over 500 participants in this seminar internationally, which is, again, a wonderful statement that there's interest in this kind of work, which is satisfying when you've been studying this for 30 years. There are a couple of opening comments to make to get into this material today. We're going to be picking up pretty much around page 13, 14 in the book. So if you have the book there, you can read along with some of the passages today. Memory, okay? So that was so important what you said about the Jewish holidays and remembrance, and Easter coming up around remembrance. I think in many ways, memory is one of the great frontiers that we don't know much about. I mean, we had some very, we've done our best to understand memory as retrieval. I mentioned last week that learning is acquiring new information. Memory is storing that information. But that's pretty easy. It's pretty cut and dry. And the old model we have of memory is you have maybe the old file cabinets that we don't have anymore. You put something in the file cabinet, you open it and you close it. That's what we do with memory. And you retrieve the memory when you want, pretty much. When you want to remember those family dinners that, to me, are so precious. We have a number of Italians involved. I grew up in a big Italian family community. We have, beginning with 20 to 50 people for dinner every weekend. There's nothing better. So you can retrieve it. Or sometimes it's retrieved spontaneously with the aroma of something cooking. So I remember my grandfather made the broccolab. We had the polpetti. We had the great meal, okay? So it's still pretty simple the way we understand memory. There's a whole other level to memory. When you realize that memory is not only captures our experiences, but it literally structures and influences us in the present. This is a tough one to think about. When you realize how many of our so-called conscious decisions are predicated on the past, our choice of partners, our choice of careers, how we behave, your tendency to flare, your tendency to withdraw, mothers and fathers. My mother did, my father did, my culture did. There are cultural memories, and one of the director of our studies, Muriel McMahon, does a lot about cultural memory, cultural inheritance, cultural inherited complexes. And if you really think it through, not only was Freud brilliant when it came to looking at memory, forgetting, and repeating. A strange note is to say that Jung's work is also based on memory, not personal. Jung's work is based on collective inherited memory. The entire world of archetypes is about inherited memory that continues driving us into the future. The memory of the heroic journey, the memory of the regression, the memory of the love of a mother or father, or the sadness. So when you look at archetypes, we're really looking at a type of memory that humanity shares, okay? And mythology is filled with stories of memory, from Mnemosyne to Lethe. From every tradition, from Judaism to Catholicism, where we have the idea of anamnesis, which is a type of inherited memory that we have. As you said, Sylvia, with Judaism, it's huge. So when we begin seeing our clients, our family members, or ourselves that are sometimes, let's use the word, plagued by memory. My God, can't you stop thinking about it? Can't you ever let go of maybe that car accident or the memory? And you're just obsessed with the memory. I think there's another level, and maybe this is one of the reasons why I've been on the scene for so many years, that I'm sniffing out there's something else. I mentioned last week, if you want to study the work of somebody absolutely brilliant on memory, read the work of Eric Kandel. Sylvia, maybe you just want to write his name down for everybody. It's E-R-I-C, Kandel. And he was awarded the Nobel Prize for his work. And he just tells some just absolutely phenomenal stories about the type of memory we can never understand. Like one story, he talks about how a person lost their memory from a traumatic brain injury. They lost all memory. And when they began to recover, not so much their memory, but they began to recover their health, they suddenly became a concert pianist. They never played piano. What in God's name happened? You know, how could they suddenly have this ability that they never touched or played a piano in their life, but suddenly they were able to tap in? See the language now? I'm kind of beginning to move into field theory, that they tapped into some preformed field that wasn't there before. And just one more step on the preamble today, two more steps, is to say that memory is really about an archetypal field. Memory informs us of the field that we're living in at any and every given moment. The cultural field, which is so important for me, and for probably many of you. I know Sylvia with the gift of language. The field of trauma that I'm sure many of us share in this seminar. That's why we're doing this. You know, who wants to spend a beautiful Saturday afternoon talking about the accident, you know, unless it speaks to us and hopefully offers some promise of hope, which is what it does offer. So we're moving forward. The other thing I want to say, the third note as an opening, is about Elie Wiesel's writing. He draws from the Hasidic tradition, where it's very sparse use of language. They may tell a sentence, they may tell something profound in 3 words. And then there was a morning. I prayed for morning. I prayed for dawn. There's a profundity in his languaging of trauma. Because number one, he's not attempting to talk about trauma. He's talking about his life all the way through. This is not a thesis on trauma, recovery, and treatment. It's not about this. This is about a man who suffered the unimaginables. And I want to remind you that where that word unimaginable comes from, it's when I met with Elie Wiesel probably 15 years ago. And I asked him a question. I said, Dr. Wiesel, how can we be and sit with somebody that's been through the unimaginables? But that's where that term comes from, okay? His writing style speaks to those things that really one can never fully talk about. And he knows that. And he told me that in private. So he's doing his best to give language, to give shape to something that in some ways almost needs to remain unseen. So that's what we're doing. And we are moving, I promise, we are moving to resilience. You know, we are going to get there. But those of you that are clinicians, you know, there are many times you have to linger in, whether it's the Negredo that Jung and the alchemists talk about, or the dark night of the soul, when you know what, you don't see any dawn coming. And I'll tell you, look, I've been practicing for 40 years. I've been through my own stuff, as many of us have. And there are times you don't see the light. Many times, of course, tomorrow's going to be better. You got a stomach ache, you feel better. You had an argument with somebody. We're going to get over it. Hopefully you can apologize or whatever. Okay. Sometimes you just, if something huge hits your life and you say, I don't know if I can make this. I don't know if I can get through this. Oh, come on, just make it better. Just have a new day. Change your way of thinking. These are some of the platitudes that psychology and religion has plied us with that don't help at all. They're actually well-intended, but they are Kathleen. Okay, remember we talked about Kathleen, his girlfriend in here. And Kathleen, I love you. Make it different. I love you. Get rid of your demons. I love you. Stop having your night terrors. Well, give me a couple of those pills every once in a while. You know, we all want that pill, but you wake up and it's right next to you, right? It's still there. So in many ways, I'm presenting this in a way that hopefully captures the experience where we can temporarily stay in this field than the great O, the dark night of the soul. And without any, at moments there are no hope. Now, I know that sounds horrible, and please, we are going to get to hope. I was thinking this morning, I love firewood and fires and all, and I lit the fireplace this morning, and I didn't light a great fire. I didn't take the time because I was rushing to get my notes ready, but I got enough so there was a couple of sparks, a couple of little cinders, right? I started the whole fire from a couple of little cinders. And I thought, from a couple of sparks. I thought, what a great image, you know? Sometimes it only takes a little spark to get the life going again, to get the fire going. Other times, even with a lot of little hot embers, it don't take. And that's something we got to live with. We hope that it's going to be different. So what we're doing in this work, and what I hope to take us through today, is another level of the experience of a man that lived through the unimaginables. You know, being brought into Auschwitz at 13 years of age, seeing things that I'm not going to even talk about any of the details. You can read all that if you want to. The details are not for this talk. The experiences are. And there's, like the Hasidic tradition, without saying all the words, it's all inferred. Okay. So we're going to pick up on page 13 if you have the book there. Okay. And we talked last week, we ended pretty much around the scene of when he went to the restaurant with Kathleen. Okay. Those of you who don't have the book, The Accident, this is the original. Okay, The Accident. It was republished in a book, in a trilogy, Night, Day, and Dawn. I think it's published as Dawn. Okay. So if you have it in that, it's the same book, same story. So remember, he goes to the restaurant. Let's go get a couple of burgers, maybe have a beer, have a hamburger, says Kathleen. What does she understand? Does she understand this man watched his father die of starvation? Does he know that people stole from each other at the risk of being murdered by either the guards or the other prisoners for stealing a tiny, tiny piece of, like a breadcrumb? Does she know that when the Americans came in to liberate the prisoners, what they found with these basically these living corpses, and they offered them, you know, from the bottom of their heart, they opened everything. They opened their hearts, their knapsacks, and they gave them chocolate and cans and hot dog, you know, whatever they had, they offered them. And Elie Wiesel was one of the people that vigorously, eagerly ate what they were offered. Many of them died. Elie Wiesel went into a coma afterwards. You can't go from deprivation, starvation to a nice chocolate milkshake or whatever they call the rations the army people carry with them. You can't do it. You have to titrate back into it. Kathleen didn't have any understanding of the process of titration back into the process of humanity, back into the process of the world of the living. She couldn't titrate that because she didn't understand it. Now, this is not any negative comment about Kathleen. She loved something, but she didn't love him because she didn't know him. That's what I'm saying. I think Kathleen last week became a symbol for many of us. And it's a symbol of someone that can care, but they don't take the time, or maybe it's too terrifying to look into the eyes and the heart and say, you know what? I can hold you. I can love you. I can make love with you. I can make you whatever, feel as secure as possible, make you all of the foods you love, whatever. But I can't take away your demons. That's love. I hope it can happen. I hope my love, or your love for me, whatever, can take the demons away. We all pray for that. Get on your knees for that one. But Kathleen, excuse me, didn't understand that. She didn't understand. I think titrate is a good word here. That one needs to be titrated back into the world of the living when you lived among corpses for so long. So let's go for a burger with that backdrop, right? And he says, no, I'm looking at this flesh. I'm repulsed. I'm nauseated. And then he writes on page 13, I was thinking to go far away where the roads leading to simplicity are known not merely to a select group, but to all. Where love, laughter, songs, prayers carry with them neither anger nor shame, where I can think about myself without anguish, without contempt, we're the wine. Kathleen is pure and not mixed with the spit of corpses. Now listen to this next line. Oh my God. This is the brilliance of Wiesel to capture in words an experience. Kathleen is pure and not mixed with the spit of corpses, where the dead live in cemeteries and not in the hearts and memories of men. I need to read that line again. I mean, this is why when I first read this book, second time, third time, I wept through the book. That's not real, is it? They're real. The dead are in the cemeteries. Okay. Importanza della bikini, becchino, Italian color. Importante discutere il lavoro della becchino. Okay, the grave diggers, people that work in the graves. They all go there. But what he's telling you is what anybody who's been through serious trauma, and again, I'm not talking about the mommy, daddy didn't go to the games and whatever. This is a different world. You're not fully in the world of the living. And when he says, again, where the dead live in cemeteries, what that means is one can put in perspective the experiences from the past. Let it die. We go visit, like we do. We visit gravestones, or you visit the jar where parents or some loved one has been and they've been cremated. You visit it. But it's no longer a living presence. Psychologically, when someone is dead, it means they've gone back to the world of the unconscious. It's no longer a living force and presence in your life. He's saying they didn't go away. And again, I hope one thing that's coming clear as we're beginning this talk and from last week is no platitudes are going to make this work. This is what Elie Wiesel taught me. This is what experience taught me. When he said the work of being with someone that's been through the unimaginable is just to sit with them. And don't try to do anything. And there's a Jungian named James Raleigh, Rhally. He said something very similar in his work. He said, the moment you find yourself wanting to offer your patient something, comfort, a hug, tea, coffee, whatever it might be, some kind words. He said, no, most times you're caught. You're caught because it's your manic defense away from this issue, away from that they're living with. Sometimes the best words are to say, I can never imagine. So it happens. So then we find that the building up to the accident. He and Kathleen are going to go to the movies. What are they going to go see? The Brothers Karamazov. Well, great story, right? Another easy day, another picnic day, right? And when you find about the main line of the story, it's questions of God, free will, and morality. That's the storyline. And the other major piece, it's about faith, doubt, and reason. These are all the issues that Wiesel wrestle with. I mean, how do you come out of this and believe in a God? And if you are interested, if you find his work captivating, I recommend you read the book, The Trial of God or God on Trial. I always get it wrong. I think it's The Trial of God, where they actually put God on trial. Said, we're the chosen people. This is what you do to us. So he wrestled with this his whole life, but somehow he never lost a sense of faith. Anyway, after he writes this piece about the cemeteries and the spirits, and he writes about Kathleen, because he sees something's happening to her through their relationship. This wonderful, beautiful, woman, always with a sense of promise. He said, Kathleen was beautiful when she suffered. Her eyes were deeper, her face warmer, fuller. Her dark beauty was simpler and more human. Her suffering had a quality of saintliness. It was her way of offering herself. I couldn't see Kathleen suffer without telling her that I loved her. As if love, though, was a negation of evil, I had and wanted to stop her suffering. So he sees, remember those who were here last week and those who read the book, one of the things he says after the restaurant, he said, I know that trauma affects us in our hearts. It darkens us. It makes us very difficult people to be around and all, but it really kind of darkens our own heart and soul. He said, what I never realized was what it does to other people. Mark that note, because it's profound. What he realizes, his suffering affects other people. And you're going to hear, he says, just get ahead of myself 1 minute. He says later in the book, he says, people like myself, talking about him, he says, we should be put on an island, lock us away somewhere, because we contaminate humanity, and often we contaminate the hope that others carry. I mean, who would not want to just, wrap your arms around them and say, come on, stop, come on back to life? It was only so easy. And if only, now here's the next thing, if only it was to end, if only the suffering was to end. However, the accident, okay? Here they are in New York City, where I'm from. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I know New York well. They're going out for a night on the town. And they're going out, and they got they're trying to walk across one of the big streets. Looks like it's safe. She takes his hand. He's hesitating because he was pale and he's very weak from not eating for a long time. He won't eat those hamburgers, right? Who could eat the burgers after what he had been through? As he's walking across the street, he's hit and run over by a cab. And this is, by the way, a true story. It's around 1955, 1956 when he came to America. And a sidebar is one of my mentors, Robert Langs. Some of you know the work of Robert Langs, a brilliant psychoanalyst. He met the real Kathleen. I never told you so, but he met the real Kathleen at a party many years later and said all this story it's 100% true. 100%. So he's run over by a cab. And he wakes up, goes in and out of his state. And he said, look, I'm bleeding. My mouth, the taste of blood in my mouth. Here I am again. Here I am again. I'm on the verge of death. And you've got to wonder at that point, how do you ever make sense of a life where what you've been through, what you've seen after being in hell for this long, watching what he watched, living with what he lived with, here we are yet again. He's back in death. Or, as I write in my notes, or did he ever leave it? See, I think that's more to the point. So my first is my little denial, right? Here he's back in the death field. He's almost killed. But then I wrote, I kind of caught myself with a couple of nice cups of coffee. I said, no. But he never left that field. And that's the point of this. He never left. And you wonder, where does resilience come from? How do you maintain any sense of hope after you say, not again, not again, not again? But something happens at that moment, which is very, very important for us. And he writes here, he says, how can one cry out against a dream? How can one scream against the dying of the light, against life that grows cold, against blood flowing out? I was dying. Okay, I'll read it again. This is on page 17. How can one cry out against a dream? How can one scream against the dying of the light, against a life that grows cold, against blood flowing out? I was dying. But he said, suddenly I had a very strange memory of Dylan Thomas's poem. Do not go gentle into the good night. Pause right there. It's such a profound thing that's happening at that point, because here he is seeped in the great awe. It's got to be a sense of despair, hopelessness, that this will never end. Why does this come to him? Now, we can never fully answer, but I think it's a moment of grace. Now, listen, I actually took the whole poem. I want to read you the poem. He gives us the first line again, do not go gentle into the good night. Now, listen to the poem against the backdrop of what his life had been like and what he did to survive. Dylan Thomas writes, do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage against the dying of the night. The wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words have forked no lightning. They do not go gently into that dark night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. grave men near death who see with blinding sight. Blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying night. And you, my father, mark that note. And you, my father, there on the sad height. Curse, bless me now with your fierce tears. I pray, do not go gentle into that dark night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. You know, the father, because I'll tell you the story about his father in a little bit. That is such a powerful piece, because all we hear as in his monologues, in his soliloquies, in his relationships, is a despair. There is no hope coming out of him. This poem is saying there's still, like the fireplace this morning, there was still some embers that were alive that could catch, that said, I'm not going gently. And, you know, as clinicians, if you could find that one thing in somebody, while never denying all of the dark and the misery and the horrors, but that one thing that gives you hope, cherish it, like that fire. Remember the movie, I think it was called, not Chariots of Fire, another one about fire, where they carried that one hot ember with them wherever they went, like a little pouch. It's the same thing with this. He's carrying that ember of hope somewhere. It's so hidden. But thank God, at the moment when he's back to near death, it appears. In many ways, the accident was a physical manifestation of the death field that he lived in. Now, this begs a question here for us. And as I was working on my notes, I needed to really make it explicit that in working with this story, I'm continuing to learn as much as I can about trauma. Because you've got to ask at some point again, why? How could it really be? What are you, cursed? You got to be cursed. You've been through a Holocaust. You saw all this stuff. Then you're living as a war orphan in France for 20 years. When is it going to stop? Don't you catch a break? And if we're honest with ourselves and honest with our patients, you realize there are times you're caught in a cycle. You're caught in a cycle whereby the constellation, and that's what I think one of Jung's greatest contributions, the whole work on constellation. It means there's a readying in the unconscious of an unconscious content, readying to emerge into consciousness and behavior and become manifested. In many ways, the death field that he was thrown into, which continued throughout his life, is an expression of a field. Now, if you look as an archetypal field, you could say, well, we have a number of examples of this, where there's an incarnation of psyche and matter. Okay, see the language. There's an incarnation, there's a manifestation of psyche and matter. You have three major pieces. One is you have the world of synchronicity. Synchronicity, as F. David Pete wrote years ago, synchronicity is the appearance of psyche and matter taking on material form. Okay, where that teacher you hadn't thought about for 20 years, you seen the name on a license plate in front of you, or somebody calls you that you haven't thought about, but it's really significant they called you. The other piece, it's schizoidal or psychoidal. Psychoidal is a term that Jung used, and also Arno Mendel uses to talk about the domain that's not purely cyclical or purely physical. It's a domain, sort of degenerative matrix out of which all experiences come from. It's called the psychoidal. The third piece, it's alchemical. When we begin to see, what I'm getting here is we have something constellated, the death, the horror in this man's life. What's keeping it propelled? What's keeping it in these ongoing iterations in his life? I think one of the only ways we can address it at this point, I'm sure I think be better formulation in the future, but to say he's embedded in the field, he's caught and possessed by a field. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later today. I'm going to give an example in music of how you can literally see the field and the breaking of a field, the breaking of a possession. So in many ways, he was in a death field. Now, come on, is it really a death field? Yeah. If you have worked with orphans, you work with people that have been through terrible traumas, people that have a trauma of losing a child, for instance, you begin to find, you know what you find? Repetition. the life of the person that's been through terrible loss, they continue to lose. The person that's been through not the person that's Elie Wiesel, the things that continue to happen to him are part and parcel of the field of death and the field of the Holocaust. And they go on, and they go on. What happens, and again, it's kind of rough to talk about it this way, but these contents become independent entities in the psyche. Now, when von Franz speaks about possession, what she's speaking about are those psychological states when the individual personality is eclipsed by the working of an archetype. Discernment is gone at those moments. Free will is gone at those moments. And what you have is the will of the archetype pursuing its own goal. Come on, we're strong. We have egos. We've done a lot of analysis. We've done this stuff. Well, I think it takes a lot more humility to realize many times in our life we're not so strong, that these things are more powerful than us. And I was talking to a group recently about the issue of how, as von Franz teaches, in fairy tales, when there is a spell put on you, the person becomes a frog or a bird or whatever, or a horse, and they could talk. The famous Russian fairy tale that Pushkin did, the fisherman and his wife, the fisherman's wife, where they catch a fish that talks. Okay, these are all about stories of possession. And I began asking myself the question, what does it mean that they take on animal form in the possessions? The fish, the bird, whatever. And I realized that it's because at the moments of a possession, the human continence is no longer there, temporarily. Human behavior, human proclivities, human tendencies are gone. And at that moment, all it is, it's a function of an archetype taking over. What we're seeing in Wiesel here is what? It's the archetype of death that's got him here again. Now, some people would say that it was a suicide attempt. We don't have any indication of suicide. It would be pure speculation. In his autobiography, it's a 2-volume set. It's an incredible piece of work. He does talk about suicide, where he talked about jumping off a boat one time. So, I mean, it's only reasonable to think that he's got to be considering this. But this did not seem to be suicide. Apparently, he was very weak, malnourished at the time. He hadn't eaten for a long time. He was refusing to eat most foods. You know what it's like. You get dizzy, you get hypoglycemic, and all these things start hitting you, and you can't see straight. And he was run over. What happens next is so powerful. I mean, not only is this a powerful moment when he's run over, he's near death. And again, I think we need to appreciate the utter despair that's got to be part of his experience at this moment. He goes to they take him to the hospital. Now, it's interesting, right? The first hospital won't take him in. And he writes, he wonders, was it because they knew he was near dead? Just why waste a bed on somebody who's going to be dead anyway? But then he goes to the second hospital, New York Hospital. And he meets Dr. Russell. And we're going now at around page 19, if you're following with the book. Dr. Russell is a young intern and a young surgeon. And he's very different from most other physicians because he talks about an element in the healing process we rarely hear about. Love. He sees this little man, this man's had many broken bones. It's run over by the cab, right? He probably is not going to make it. There's a good chance he's not going to make it. And he sees it, as I mentioned last week, on his face, you could read his history like a map, like the contours of a map. You could see what this guy has been through, the tortures, the terror, the deprivation. And he must have felt, who in God's name, what is this person? What could he have ever gone through to look like this, to be like this? And he takes pity on him, and he has a feeling about him. And he develops a rapport with him. So they come into the hospital, and they got to figure out what they're going to do right away. And he says to Kathleen, who's adjoining, our main character, she says, who are you? Are you his wife? His mother? No, maybe it's a girlfriend. She said, yeah, I'm his girlfriend. And Russell says on page 19, it's very powerful here. His girlfriend. In that case, there are good reasons not to lose hope. Love is worth as much as prayer, sometimes more. Then Kathleen burst into tears. And this moment, as well as a moment when he remembered the Dylan Thomas poem, I call it a contrapuntal moment. Contrapuntal in music means when there are two harmonies running together. Okay? The accident, he's near death, but he suddenly remembers, don't go gently into the dark night. At the face of death, he's remembering resilience and hope and the need to fight and struggle. At this moment, again, it's a contrapuntal moment because when they're holding out little hope for, even with surgery, because there's so many broken bones and this guy is so frail, he says, maybe love could do something. But what's complicated here is, and I wrestled with this as I worked on this material, because again, she loves something about him, but she didn't love his nature because she didn't know the nature. Maybe what Dr. Russell is referring to is that just the archetype of love itself can help people. I mean, how many times do we pray for people we don't even know? And sometimes things happen. I mean, those of you that have ever been in clinical supervision, a lot of times it happens. You do a piece of supervisory work on a patient, they come back the next week and they're changed. And I've seen it's a type of conscious intentionality in supervision, and things happen. I think it's an act of grace and love many times. Okay, so he gets into they do surgery with the sense of maybe a little bit of hope. He's got no hope. But now, what we want to do is we want to go into what his experience is as they're doing surgery. We're going to help him. We're going to bring life back. Okay, we learned that surgery lasted 5 hours, at least 2 surgeons and more. And throughout the surgery, he hovered between life and death. His blood pressure went up and down, near death, and back. On the 5th day, he writes, I regained consciousness, page 20, okay? On the 5th day, I regained consciousness. I felt alone, abandoned. Deep inside, I discovered a regret. What's the regret? È meglio morire. Ma sarà meglio morire qua. Per sopravvivere non è buono. He says, it would have been better to die. I don't want to survive. I'll read it again. It's a curve, right? We're not in the custom of thinking this way. This is so far from our world. Hopefully it's far from our world. But he says, page 20, he writes, on the 5th day, I regained consciousness. I felt alone and abandoned. Now, why abandoned? Hold on. Deep inside, I discovered a regret. I would have preferred to die. What are you, nuts? Well, what kind of human being are you? Why do you prefer to die? Why does he prefer to die? Because inside of him, he is dead. Have you ever studied Guntrip's work on the schizoidal phenomena? Dead parts. Michael Eigen, famous analyst in New York, wrote a major book, Dead Parts in Living People. There are dead parts. Von Franz wrote about this. One of the most captivating images I've ever I heard when she writes in the book The Little Prince. Remember that? When she meets the little prince, when St. Anton meets the little prince. And little prince says, I live on an asteroid, and there are 4 volcanoes, but one of them is extinct. Von Franz makes what I feel is one of the most brilliant interpretations in analytic history. And one of the gutsiest, like that's such a word, gutsy, one of the most gutsy, one of the most brave. She said, there are times when something becomes extinct in our personality because of trauma. And it may not be recovered. I mentioned last week, I think America, more than other countries, lives with this perpetual fantasy. It's all going to get better. Everything is retrievable. And I gave a lecture a couple of weeks ago on Eurydice and Orpheus, saying, and I called it humanity's grand deception. We're going to get everything back. Everything's going to come back. You don't. Okay? So this is so powerful here because to understand somebody who's been through severe trauma, a part of them is in the field of death. For them, the invitation to come into life is a foreign world. For them, what do you mean life? What am I going to do? Go to Times Square, going to make love, we're going to have a dinner. You can't. That's all I see. All I see is what I've been through. And this is what I said about memory and your piece in the beginning today, Sylvia, that memory will eclipse contemporary events when you have been through something this severe or even close to this. People, and look, this are people that have been through other forms of trauma that we know, family violence, sexual abuse in families. Those of you that live in countries where there has been a tremendous war and violence. I mean, Sylvia and I and others were doing more and more work in Latin America, and you hear stories that just make your heart break of what goes on. Other parts of the world as well. But anyway, this piece we need to understand. Deep inside, I discovered a regret that I would have preferred to die. Okay, page 20. Dr. Russell says, Russell comes back to the room to tell his patient that you're going to live. You're not going to lose your legs. He says, you're going to come back. And he says, you've come back from very far. I didn't answer, says Elijah. I still felt regret at having come back from so far. Russell, page 21. Russell, you must thank God. How does one thank God? I asked him. We then learned that it left him with joy knowing it's strange. It left him with some joy knowing that he wouldn't die. But he goes on here, page 21. How does one thank God? I repeated. I would have liked to add, why thank him? I had not been able to understand for a long time why in the world God had done what God had done to deserve man. I'll read that again, page 21. Elijah says, how does one thank God? I repeated. I would have liked to add, why thank him? I had not been able to understand for a long time what in the world God had done to deserve man. And Russell says, well, look, a little bit later, page 22. We're afraid of infection. Elijah says, and the enemy will be victorious. You see, doctor, what people say is true. Man carries his fiercest enemy within himself. Hell isn't others, it's ourselves. Hell is a burning fever that makes you feel cold. I'll read it again. It's just, the writing is so poignant. I don't want to say brilliant because you can't talk brilliant in this context. It goes to the heart of what one is living with. Even if it's disturbing for us to hear it and for me to even read this, he writes again, and the enemy will be victorious. You see, doctor, what people say is true. Man carries his fiercest enemy within himself. Hell is in others, it's ourselves. Hell is the burning fever that makes you feel cold. We were speaking the mature language of men who are in direct contact with death. Dr. Russell, you're in pain. It's normal. He went on without waiting for an answer. You're covered with wounds. Your body is rebelling. Pain is your body's way of protesting. Page 25. Elijah answers. Death, I was thinking. Death, I was thinking. He thinks death is my enemy. He's mistaken. Death is not my enemy. If he doesn't know that, he doesn't know anything. Or at least he doesn't know too much. He has seen me come back to life, but he doesn't know what I think of life and death. Or could he possibly know and not show it? Doubt, like the insistent buzz of a bee inside me, was putting my nerves on edge. You get the picture? This is a world that we're not familiar with. We want something different to happen. We want redemption. Now, I'm going to pick up on these notes next week. I've got 18 pages of notes here for today. What I want to do, though, excuse me, is I want to show a piece. I want to have a piece of music which really captures what we're talking about here. The issue we're wrestling with is how, in God's name, do you break the spin, break the vortex that you're in here? How do you stop it? How do you make it stop? How do you ever believe that from the camps, from the pogroms to the camps, cattle cars, death, crematoriums, and then be run over by camp, how do you ever hope it's going to stop? There's got to be something that interrupts the cycle. I mentioned a piece of music by Gorecki last week. It's called Symphony of Sorrowful Songs, the Third Symphony. And there's one portion in the first movement I've always been taken by, but I think I finally understood it, what it's about. What we're going to hear is the latter part of the first movement. So about three minutes, and then I want to thank Dara putting this together, and also Sylvia that helped put this together today. It's a piece of music where what they do is in the first movement in particular, they play a replicative theme and it goes up octave by octave, bum 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 bum, and keeps on going up. All of a sudden, they do something in opera which is called fermata. Okay, Italian colors, ma questa fermata. It's not sostenuto. It's not sustaining a note. They stop on a note. It's a haunting moment because up to this point, you say, I can't hear anymore. This thing is so dark. It's a dark, dark piece of music. And by the way, it was written in response to a note that was found in the cell in Auschwitz of a mother that would never see a child again. And Gorecki in the interview, check out the interview on YouTube. He said, I had to do something with this piece, with this story, with the poem. And the poem is part of the music. Anyway, going up octave, going up octave, going up octave, all of a sudden you hear a note is held. And suddenly you hear something entering that note, something joining, matching that note perfectly. Can we play this, Sylvia, please? And then I'll try to explain what is happening there. But again, up to this point in the music, it is so dark you want it to stop. And when it gets that point of fermata, something changes. Okay. Why I'm presenting this is not just a nice filler we put in the kind of talk to make it pretty, whatever. I think this is a moment of breaking of a spell, and here's the prayer. Okay, the prayer is that Wiesel can get to this moment, which he does towards the end of his life. His final book, one of his final books was "I Have a Mad Desire to Dance," when he finally talked about love after maybe 50 books. Anyone, patient, anybody that's lived with trauma, you hope to God this song could work, because here's what it does. We hear the cycling, and it is a replicative, it's an iterative cycle, building octave upon octave upon octave. It's haunting, it's beautiful, it's eerie, and it's darker than night at times. If you listen to this when you're alone, a glass of wine, you know, you'll feel it more than now. Right now we're among community people. And I remember listening to it a number of times, and you just wanted it to end. And by the way, where I found out about this music, the backstory, very quickly, is Linda Leonard, the young analyst, a lovely woman who wrote, what was it, Wounded Woman, right? Wounded Woman, the story of the Puella. She talked about this at a lecture, and they played it the first time in Colorado on public radio. She said the cars stopped on the highway. They literally stopped. That's how powerful this music is. So what's happening here is we see the words, and by the way, I also use this piece of music as the soundtrack in a screenplay I was writing on this book, on the accident, and I hadn't known it was written in response to the Holocaust. Is that wild? True story. So anyway, you can't, you don't want, you want to stop, shut the music, throw the radio or the thing out the window, okay? And all of a sudden, you hear that moment, that the fermata. It's not even a couple of notes. It's staying at that one note. And fermate, also known as a hold or a pause, or as a grand pause when placed on a music, or it's a symbol of musical notation indicating that the note should be prolonged beyond the normal duration to indicate there's a shift coming. That's the point. And what I believe is happening when we listen to music, right, this piece right here, the iteration has stopped. Can you hear it? And the feel has begun to break open at this moment. All of a sudden, there's something that resonates with that sound. Kathleen doesn't resonate with him because make it better. I love you. Come into my arms, man. It's all going to be better in the morning. Give me a break. Therapy is going to make you feel. Oh, stop. Stop. When something resonates with that note, now what is that something that resonates? Was that the Dawn Upshur as a soloist in it? Dawn Upshur is one of the yeah, it is. Thank you. Dawn Upshur is one of the most famous soloists, sopranos. She does probably the most profound version of this song. That was her we heard just now, Dawn Upshur. Okay, but anyway, what enters at that moment that begins to break the replicative cycle and that matches that harmonic of that feel? It's the feminine. The feminine. Jan was on, you work on Eros. Here it is right here. You want a piece of music to give you even more validation, not that you need it, but a musical amplification for this. The feminine comes in at this point to match the experience where it was. Unless that matching happens in life, we ain't going to get there, and we're going to continue to stay forevermore locked in this cycle, unfortunately. All of a sudden, you hear it opens up. It's powerful. And for the first time, King, so I just caught through it recently, the words come. At times, what breaks the cycle is being able to say, I've never been able to say these words before. In the platoon, in the war, what I saw in the hospital with my kid, with my wife, with my husband, I never said the words before. I couldn't do it before. Suddenly, at that moment, after that harmonic convergence that occurs right there, the entrainment, powerful entrainment, the feminine comes in, and we suddenly hear the words, difficult as they are. Something's breaking open. It's a moment of healing that occurs. And the prayer, the hope, the dream here is that he can get there. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick up next week on page, let me get it. We're going back into the hospital scene. Okay, on page 24. Okay, we're going to pick up on page 24. So in 3 years, we'll get through this book. In 3 years now. I remember teaching the Neumann book. I was in New York. We taught it for 3 years. We did line by line.
Wonderful. Michael, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing us into this harmonic. I don't know about the rest of you, but when those notes played, it really resonated and brought us all together in that moment. And so today, as we go on, those of us celebrating Passover, both the liberation from oppression and the remembrance and the memory, and moving forward to preparations for celebrating Easter next week, let us continue this exploration as we started, with stout hearts, with steady hands, and with unflinching gaze.
Wow.
Thank you all so much, and celebrate what is yours to celebrate, and we'll see you next week. Remember that you will not get this recording until next Thursday. Good night.
Bye-bye.